Okay, thank you. That was a great discussion. They're right. You could keep talking about those things for days. Okay, next I'm going to introduce our final panel for today, and I'm going to ask George Al-Koura to come up and he's going to be the panel moderator, so if you could come on up and bring your team with you and introduce them as you come up, that'd be great.
Okay, so everyone can hear me again? Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you everyone for staying awake and for participating in our late afternoon fireside chat. Not much of a fire, but I mean, this is all pretty hot. So I'm going to introduce my panelists today. These folks are absolutely wonderful people. They are honestly a really amazing quality for us to come out here and to share their expertise and their knowledge with us. In the couple chats I've had with both of them, just even trying to get this thing together, I've had my perspectives kind of, we'll say, brought along correctly and kind of modernized based on those unique backgrounds that they have. To introduce them, sitting actually close to me here, currently a senior analyst at a major telco. She is a specialist in cyber threat intelligence as well as incident response. She is also an academic leader who's done many years of graduate level academic research and publishing. She is also the founder and current president of the Emerging Leaders in Canadian Security, ELKS. That's an organization that is specifically built to help graduates and young professionals open doors, find and create opportunities for themselves to get into the security industry in Canada. So everyone, if you could please give a round of applause to Miss Rachel Babins. Also joining me is, well, I'm sitting beside her, you will find someone who's currently a senior cybersecurity strategic advisor for Shared Services Canada. She is the former National Information System Security Officer for the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. And as I discovered this morning, a fellow veteran of many of the same Army units and great folks that we grew up coming together on at Canadian Forces Network Operations Center and Canadian Forces Signals Operations Center. So please, folks, if you put your hands together for Miss Sherry Rumbolt. So I'm going to sit down for a second. So we'll start our panel. And really, looking at the topic of threat intelligence and the threat landscape, it's important to look at things from a contextual standpoint. What threat intelligence means to me as someone who works in a commercial organization in, for example, the online dating space, versus someone who works in a pure public sector job, versus someone who works at a telco, versus someone who works at a fintech company, their concerns and what they want to get out of threat intelligence is going to be vastly different. So my initial question to you guys, how would you define threat intelligence? How would you define the threat landscape? And what does it mean to you both, respectively, for your organizations? Rachel, if you'd like to begin.
Sure. So this is kind of a funny story, but I remember when I first got hired as a cyber threat intelligence analyst. This was, a few years back when I was starting my career. I would tell people, yeah, I work in cyber threat intelligence, and they would kind of give me a funny look like, are you working as the next James Bond, or what kind of job what does that mean? So I came up with a way to sort of describe it to people, and I think this plays into what you were saying about what is the importance of having a team like this. And you can apply this beyond cyber, so even in cases where you're building out fusion centers or looking at a corporate security environment that's not necessarily reliant, we're looking at your technology and tech infrastructure. And the way that I like to define CTI is really we are the only team that have our backs truly to the organization. Everyone else in information security is looking at the organization, they're fiddling around with the firewall or looking at logs, looking at user activity, that kind of thing. What's unique about CTI is that our priority is not that internal lens. We're looking outwards into the world, and we're trying to understand what's coming at us, what's coming at the organization and at our sector and at our country at large. And it's really about mapping out those trends, mapping out those threat actors, and trying to understand how they might one day impact our organization, if at all. And that, that's, to me, that's the bread and butter. That's the real job of CTI. If you're doing it from a cyber perspective, it's the cyber threat actors and the cyber methods, but you could also do it from a fraud perspective, or you could do it from a corporate security. What are the physical threats that could one day impact our organization? But at its root, that's how I see the job of an intelligence analyst.
And I think to add to what Rachel said as well is that not every organization is going to have a threat intelligence group of people. I mean, I think that that's very, optimistic in a lot of cases too. And as a result of that, like not everybody even has a small, medium businesses don't even have a huge capability in terms of a security response team or a security operations team. So, I mean, I think that there's a joint effort to work together in many capabilities to share that knowledge of threat intelligence. Also know your own business, whether it's small, medium, or large. Understand what it is that what threats are out there in mainstay environments. I mean, from a strategic, from a tactical, and from an operational perspective, and then see how that actually affects your own organization. So, it's really, really important to know your own business. Once you know your own business, then you can actually know what your threats are and what could be coming towards you and what you can actually defend against. And also, it's a bi-directional relationship. So it's not just about you defending your own threats, but also that sharing of information with the greater community. And I think in Canada, we need to do a better job at working together and trusting each other to work in a very, very hybrid model where we're all unified in providing that information. And I think that there's a lot of threat information out there from different various sources. We all know what they are, I think. Even from just Google itself, but then there's other sources. But just understanding that business, understanding the impacts to your organization, knowing how to mitigate that, and then start working on a plan. So, I mean, in a perfect world, we'd have this fantastic SOC, we'd have threat intelligence group of people in a very large organization working with the SOC analysts, working with our other business associates, and then working with the greater community. That doesn't necessarily always happen, so as a result of that, I think it's really important to be familiar with threat intelligence, understand your own emerging threats, and try to figure out ways of actually mitigating that.
Beautiful, I appreciate that. And actually, you kind of touched on something I would say that's really important, especially for our next question, Sherry, on the matter of knowing your business, knowing your organization's business. There was a Sophos ransomware report that came out earlier this year, and it was saying that in 2021, 39% of small and medium businesses in Canada suffered a ransomware attack. 65% anticipated, of 65% of the ones surveyed, so we don't even know, the figure's probably higher, anticipated that they would be the victim of a ransomware attack or attempted ransomware attack this year. Knowing that, and knowing that ransomware for the average medium-scale organization has cost roughly $1.92 million in mitigation damage. That's per the Sophos report, surveyed for medium-sized organizations in Canada. The question becomes, how can small and medium businesses who are often new to network security as a concept and as a practice and as a business enabler, how can they better defend themselves against this emerging, and I don't even want to say emerging like it's a new threat. Ransomware has been a threat since longer than almost any of us have been in InfoSec, except for yourself, Sherry, because you could
I've
probably
been around
teach
a
us how
while.
to do it. But, you know, the new threat of ransomware, and Rachel, you touched on this, I think, yesterday. It is evolving in the sense that it is becoming more complex and it is becoming more effective at infecting our environments. But the concept of ransomware still hasn't changed. So my question to both of you is, what can small and medium businesses today who might be new to cybersecurity, who might not have the budget, who might not have the resources, might not have the staffing, how can they begin programmatically defending against the ransomware threat?
Well, I mean, I can start. Patching is just not enough anymore. I think everybody knows that, and I think that, you know, I always say to everybody, understand your business, or understand your assets, understand your humans inside of the organization, and understand what it is that you actually want to protect in terms of data. So that's the most important thing when you think about ransomware attacks. Assume that you're going to be attacked, or you have been, and then work backwards. And that means that, you know, patching is very important, but understand too the segregation of your network. Segregate the network. Don't put everything in the same spot. Make sure that you're actually doing valid backups. Making sure that you actually have education awareness and training campaigns for your employees, for your customers, for folks that are actually having access to those important data documents. Also, at the same time too, I can't stress this enough, our back still works. Elevated privileged accounts, making sure that those account managements still work, they work. Don't give everybody the crown jewels and the keys to the castle. Keep that separate. Make sure that you're actually aware of who's got that. Have things in place like auditing tools, change auditor, whatever, to look at who's actually accessing those systems. And if you keep an eye, watchful eye, you don't necessarily need to have a SOC of 100, but if you keep watchful eye on what's going on, you will detect anomalous activity. And I think it's really important to be aware of that anomalous activity and keep eyes on. And it doesn't necessarily mean 24/7 monitoring, but it means understanding your business. Once you understand your business, you have a better, I think you're a little bit more successful at that. And again, too, if you're outsourcing all of that, then make sure that your MOUs, SLAs, and all your contract agreements are satisfying some of those requirements, because often what we find is that those contracts are all written up and the agreements are in place, and everybody assumes that somebody else is doing something until something bad happens, and then all of a sudden there's lots of fingers being pointed around. So it's really good idea to make sure that everybody understands what it is that they're doing and their roles are exercised. And I can't stress that enough, because often we all say, yeah, we've got insurance, we've got all the plans in place, everybody's ready to roll, and then something happens, and then you realize that you've never exercised any of it, and that nobody really, all the passwords have been changed 6 months ago, nobody has access to the new ones, and then all of a sudden your data's probably in 5 different areas that you didn't actually authorize in the first place. So really key things, I think, and it's still the basics. At the end of the day, it's still the basics, and unfortunately the basic things that we want to protect against, the attackers are still getting in as a result of that, because they're not actually done 100%.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've said here. I think, I would also say when it comes to protecting yourself as a small or medium-sized business, and putting, resources aside, whether that's time or money to set up all these things. And, something I'll say quickly here is there's a lot of tools you can use that are open source, and they're not necessarily, very complicated to set up. So MISP is a great example of a tool that you can go and download today, and you'll use to better fortify your network if you're a small or medium-sized business. The other thing that I'll say is, when it comes to, if you think about, part of the job of a cyber threat intelligence analyst is to put your sort of mind in the place of what would a threat actor do? What is the easiest way for a threat actor to compromise some network, right? They most likely, unless they're state-sponsored, are not going to go for the most complicated, crazy, different, You need like 3 different people in a room coding to get this done. They're going to go for this low-hanging fruit. What can I easily sort of accomplish? And if you think about a threat actor that might want to compromise a large company or a lot of customers, steal a lot of credit cards, that kind of thing, it's much easier for them to go through a medium or small-sized company or someone in the supply chain that maybe doesn't have a whole SOC dedicated working 24/7 than it would be to go after the big fish, which would maybe be the bank or a larger company that plugs into that supply chain. And what we've seen in terms of open source reporting and media reports that have been out, I know the Secret Service has come out with a report, I think it was last year or the year before. There's just been tons written about supply chains and the need for small and medium-sized businesses to be better protected as a result of all of the supply chain compromises that are going on. And this ties very nicely back to ransomware, as a lot of these ransomware attack vectors are not what you would think of as a ton of people in a room that are drawing up complicated. It's a lot of going through supply chains and trying to get what you need to encrypt data and then hold a company hostage so that they pay that ransom payment.
No, I appreciate that perspective, and I think what I would really wanted to get from you guys, and both of you did it quite wonderfully, for the folks in the audience and people who are listening on the internet, who happen to be part of small and medium organizations, who might look at all the things that they're seeing today and tomorrow and think, man, we can't afford this, or we can't find this talent. It's giving them some tools to start. I think your point on open source free tools, that should really be where people begin, right? Because everyone wants the big flashy thing. And I've seen it, you've probably seen it, I know you've seen it. They spend all the big money on the $500,000, $2 million procurement, and it sits unconfigured on the shelf until its end of life. Literally, I've seen that in both public and private organizations. Using a freeware tool, it might not be the sexiest, it might not be even insurance compliant, but it still gets the job done and it gives your people somewhere to start.
Well, and I think that we all know we've got shortages everywhere, right? So, I mean, we're not necessarily, we're not able to plug all the holes because obviously we have skill shortage and we have employee resource shortages. Yeah. And, there are people, we need people to do a lot of vital jobs. And those jobs are to actually protect those systems and protect those assets. And it's really, really important because often too there's burnout because the ones that are actually, on the ground working and doing some of these things are not necessarily having the ability to be able to monitor, mitigate, do threat hunting, conduct all types of security incident response to the point where they're actually, looking at each of the logs. I mean, it's near impossible with the amount of data that we're all coming, even from a small company. A very small company has incredible amounts of data. And who's sifting through that data? Who's actually looking for any type of anomalous activity? I think that it's unreasonable to think that there's humans that can actually do all of that. So I mean, we need to start moving towards automation. We need to start moving towards a smarter approach to handling that information and protecting that information.
I would certainly agree, and it actually kind of brings up the next topic or point. I'm going to stand up because my legs are getting a little bit tired. The next topic, I'm sorry, I'm usually...
George is going to keep everybody awake. Are you guys like...
I'm going to keep moving around. I'm sorry, guys. I need you to know that in my outside life, I'm usually working out 3 or 4 hours a day. All this sitting around is just not in my jam, so I'm going to get up and move. On the topic of ICS, right, and this is relevant as well in terms of the threat landscape and emerging issues. Now that you have a lot of organizations who are dealing with critical pieces of infrastructure and hardware that before were by design made to be air-gapped and not connected to anything internet-facing, those critical systems are now being plugged into networks. And when we're looking at things like a power grid, water filtration system. If we're looking at not even just an electronic grid, but if you're looking at a hydroelectric system as well, you're dealing with dams. Like there's potential flooding issues that are happening right now in Manitoba. But speaking of when there are not issues happening in Manitoba on flooding. But these types of things are all digitally controlled and they're in integrated systems. We have seen, in some cases in other areas in the world, that there have been power plants and even oil refinery facilities that have been successfully attacked to the point of physical damage. We have seen hospitals have their equipment be not available for service and use, which has potentially costed lives for critical procedures because their systems have been taken down. So my question to you both is, given the emerging and often complex nature of these architectures and these systems, what can small and medium organizations who are especially part of that supply chain, what can they do to help contribute to securing these critical infrastructures that are now becoming internet connected? Rachel, you can start.
Sure. So I love this question. I honestly think that when it comes to cyber, a lot of our attention is spent on the IT, data, systems, information technology, right? But if I, again, putting myself in a threat actor's shoes, what is the juiciest target that's potentially out there? It is that physical system that can have implications in the physical world. Turning off the energy grid imagine if the energy grid was turned off for 12 hours in your home where you live. Like, how would that impact your life? You wouldn't be able to work, you wouldn't be able to get whatever it is. Your life goes on hold for those 12 hours because of how reliant we are on that critical infrastructure. And the way I see it as more attacks and malwares and different things come up that specifically look to target ICS systems. We see more ICS tailored malware in the last 5 years than ever before. We as a society need to adapt. And Sherry was saying before, patching is not enough. And a lot of times in the ICS environment, firstly, there's a lot of targeted attacks that go through the IT and go into the OT. And then also we get a lot of attacks where, they're trying to get through to an air-gapped network, but then they're unable to because of what George was saying before, that there are some systems that are completely air-gapped and unable to be penetrated. What I think is important is, when it comes to vulnerabilities and patching, there are some of these ICS systems that are so old that they're pretty much unable to be patched. And although there's obviously a cost to upgrading those systems, and you wouldn't want the brunt of that cost to go to a smaller, medium-sized business, I would say that there's a security implication for the country at large.
Well, and that was exactly what I was going to say, is that there's a lot of legacy systems out there, SCADA, whatever, and two, some of those legacy systems, as we go through attrition and people are retiring and leaving the workforce that used to be the experts on some of those systems, all of a sudden we probably have some vulnerabilities in that we don't have folks managing those systems in the same manner as before. And I mean, they were air-gapped, and I've seen lots of issues in the past. I mean, potentially where USB sticks were the patching mechanism. So you'd download something from the internet, you bring it across, hopefully air gap or do some sort of malware scan on it before you put it into the SCADA system. And sometimes that happened, sometimes it didn't. And then there's no detection on there as to whether or not, and no monitoring as to whether or not there's even a virus on some of the legacy systems, because there is no detection. So, I mean, you know, you're really taking a risk, and it's a very popular, opportunity for somebody that wants to do wrong to utilize these systems, because they do know that a lot of them are old. They know that they're not being patched. Some are not being replaced in the same manner because the technology has just evolved so much. And I think that we have to get ahead of that, in the sense that we need to have other mitigating factors. So, you know, you have to look at the business and look at how you can actually mitigate and safeguard those systems if you do have legacy. And then for the ones that are now becoming more connected to the internet, it's a double-edged sword for me. One, you actually have monitoring, you have some visibility, you can actually see what's going on, but you actually need resources to be looking at that, or you need automation to be looking at that, and we don't necessarily have that luxury sometimes. So, I mean, I think that, you know, there's two sides of the coin there, but I think that everybody has to be mindful. So if you do have those systems, you need to be protecting them one way or the other. And again, patching is not enough. I mean, there's a lot of education, a lot of awareness, knowing experts actually managing these that are in tune enough to know when there's something that's unusual that's happening. And then also have a backup plan, always. A mitigating plan, and hopefully a backup system, and have your data backed up as well in another repository somewhere. And please, I'm hoping everybody's doing some sort of tabletop or emergency, plans for what if this fails, and what do we do? What's our plan B or C or D? So that's so imperative, and I hope that that's happening out there.
I agree with that, and thank you both for those thoughts, because we're all aligned on it. I also believe, and I don't know if you guys are on the same page as me, as a security principle, it's not a matter of when or if you get compromised, but rather when. We will all be compromised. Anyone who comes into your office and tries to sell you, like, there's two terms I hate. One is like turnkey and military grade. If I hear either of those two terms and you're a salesperson, you're not selling to me. I ain't buying what you're doing. That's snake oil. But if you accept the fact that you will most likely deal with a compromise, then you start planning your organization, your defensive perimeter to mitigate and to recover.
Make the assumption that it's already happened.
Yeah. I think the other follow on to this then, smart systems. A lot of folks, they have Google or was it Alexa, smart home systems. There's smart systems that are now taking on roadways. Tesla's got the smart car. I've personally worked on some smart automation projects dealing with traffic circulation. Given that there is now a converged security, trend, right, where physical and network and personal are all coming together. In the future of our industry and for future leadership in security, does a future potential senior security leader, even if they come from an information security background, does a future CISO also have to have some understanding of physical security principles as well, since everything is becoming so digitally integrated?
Yeah, this is something I've thought about a lot. And, we talk a lot about safe cyber practices when it comes to work, setting up some sort of SOC, setting up some kind of, privilege, who's going to have access to what, segmentation. It's interesting when you bring it back to the personal, and a lot of people are working from home. We can only expect that that's going to continue. What happens if you have an Alexa device in the same room where you're having meetings about things that are sensitive and related to your company, right? How are you detecting or monitoring for people listening in on your home network? Are you doing that at all? And for the vast majority of people, out there, I would say probably not. I probably have some sort of standard antivirus that's been installed since day one on my computer, and that's about it. So it brings up this interesting question as we're seeing more and more threats come up on the cyber threat landscape, and we're seeing work and personal being merged together now more than ever. I think we're moving into a model where people are going to have some sort of telemetry available on their home networks, where they're able to better detect and catch potentially bad activity. There's also, of course, the hygiene question about not keeping these devices around while you're having sensitive conversations. I know, some companies have strict policies on that, some companies do not. I think we're going to hear more and more about, how to secure your home because of the job that you potentially have. Like, that's going to be part of onboarding. That's going to be part of, the contract potentially that you sign with an employer, especially if you have a job where, you're dealing with a lot of sensitive information.
Well, and I think that, all of us average folks have probably over 200 interconnected systems one way or the other in our home that most of them we're not even aware of. And I think that, for those of us working from home, I think Rachel had a really good point, and that's being mindful of your surroundings. And then secondly, for the folks going into the office, I think that everybody now, we're pretty attached to our devices. So, I think everybody wants to bring those into the office. They want to have them near. They don't want to put them in a lockbox or leave them in their vehicle or whatever. They want to bring everything with them so that, they have access. So again, that's kind of policy, but physical security is very important. And then I also want to add that social engineering still works, and it works really, really well. And there's a lot of physical aspects to the office environment that we still need to be very cognizant of as we consider going back to work or the physical spaces in which we work, because I think that even during COVID, potentially the leases on certain buildings are probably not even there anymore, and now the companies probably lease different buildings or sharing spaces with others. And instead of having a cubicle, you might just have a place that you go drop your laptop for a couple of hours and work in a hybrid environment. So when you're in those environments, you're not necessarily sure who's right next door to you, working with you, and if you're having a call, of one sort of conference call, or you're on the phone talking to a client or a colleague, you have to be mindful of what you're discussing as well. So I think that our world and the way that we work has shifted in a physical aspect as well as a digital aspect, and it's really important to be mindful of what it is that you're doing and the surroundings that you're in.
Beautiful. So, first of all, thank you for those responses. I think those covered all the big things that we probably should be covering. We have 2 and a bit minutes left. What we would like to do, and we talked about this since the morning, we would like to open it to the floor. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? If anyone has any questions at all. I can't see because the light's in my eyes.
We know it's the end of the day and you guys all want to go home or whatever, but we'd love to take your questions.
What's the next big buzzword? We've got zero trust, we've got OT, IDS,
So just for everyone listening, the lady just asked, what is the next big buzzword? We've had, was it ICS? We've had, what was the other one? Zero trust. Friends, what is next from the insufferable?
It's not next, it's here, and this is probably an old one, but for me, my life right now is all about cloud and getting smart on cloud.
Rachel, what's the cloud? No, it's literally someone else's computer, but yes. Yeah.
I think, it's funny, I'm just going to say hybrid, because everything right now, everybody's talking about hybrid, and I think it relates to us as humans and where we work and how we act, but it also relates to, the data and everything. So, we've got cloud data, we've got on-prem data, we've got, on-prem humans, we've got working from home humans, we've got everything is hybrid. So that's my buzzword right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't like dealing in buzzwordology. If ever I'm writing a document or a report or an email and there's way too many buzzwords in it and I find my own work insufferable, I'll just delete it and restart. Because really, it's like dealing with clients. You don't want to do something that's going to upset a client. So when you're dealing with your own team or you're dealing with a fellow executive or whatever it is, I really believe we need to go back to being authentic in how we speak to each other. if a term has to be labeled or assigned to something, cool, that's great. But if it doesn't actually mean anything, let's not make up words in the lexicon for it. Let's go back to treating each other as human beings and talking to one another as human beings, because ultimately we're trying to just solve problems. Some problems might be the same, some interests might be different, some things might not work out so we can't work together. But to just try to ram, Marcom, like really flashy marketing and buzzwords down people and expect people to pay things at 40% gross margin or higher, I don't think that's really going to fly for much longer in our industry.
Anything else? Okay.
Do you think there's value to Canadian business owners in having their cloud presence restricted to being resident in Canada? Their data and their cloud services?
Well, there's FIPA and FOIPA legislation, so certain provinces will actually ensure that that's the case. I live in British Columbia, and that is a requirement.
It is a requirement?
It is so, yeah. So there's some provinces in Canada that actually has that as a mandatory requirement. And then with the federal government as well, our data centers have to be in Canada.
Yeah.
So how does a business in Canada find out if there are restrictions? Because there are very few Canadian-owned, operated cloud data protection providers.
You need to look at the privacy legislation for the province that you live in and then go forward from there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. That's dealing with a global company. I deal with that question quite a bit, but thankfully I have a very wonderful chief privacy officer who's our general counsel, who does all that heavy lifting brain work for us. And I'm just like, yep, we're not going to get compromised. Cool.
And I have a name for you too if you want to get more information.
So what I want to offer, just because our ticker's off, if both of you, Rachel, starting with you, just some closing thoughts for the audience.
I'm going to end sort of where we began, which is where you introduced me, talking a bit about emerging leaders in Canadian security. Merging that a bit with threat intelligence, we need more threat intelligence analysts in the sector. I'm seeing a lot of young folks in the audience. If any of you are interested in breaking into the sector, come and talk to me. Add me on LinkedIn. We need more talent in the cybersecurity industry in Canada in general, but definitely in threat intelligence too. And it's not closed off. It's not only for people that have been studying computer science their whole. It's really a sector that's big enough for everyone. So I'd love to talk to any of you who are interested in joining.
Thank you. And Sherry?
And I think for me too, like I've been around for a while, and I always say to everybody, say yes to every opportunity you can get. So, there's so much opportunities out there right now for not only roles in cyber, roles in IT, and I think that we have so many shortages across Canada, and we are doing our best, and there's a bunch of us, especially at this conference and all across Canada, trying to build that diverse, inclusive talent where everybody belongs. And I think that we need to change the culture in each organization to ensure that that is the case. And that is one of my passions, and I want you all to work with me to ensure that that happens and that everybody feels that they can walk into a workplace every single day. They are happy to be there, they belong, they feel that they are providing value. And I want you all to know that we appreciate every one of you.
Yeah, and just in final closing, what I really want to hammer home, same kind of idea as Rachel's brought up. Alex is doing great work. I know her colleagues working in that organization as well. They will take care of you. Please reach out to them. It is worth your time. And what Sherry's talking about is completely on point. Speaking personally, I have no computer science background. I studied political science and psychology. I have an arts degree. In fact, I taught myself how to do this job. I only started in this industry about 6.5 years ago. I started off as a level 1 analyst working in the Security Operations Center. I'm now a CISO at a very respectable medium-sized company. If I can do it, anyone can do it. I am no smarter than anyone else in this room. Please, if you want to do it, if you have a dream of doing something, figure it out. The resources are here. We all want to help you. Organizations like CyberX are here to help. Just put your hand up and make your voice heard. Thank you, everyone, for your attention today.